Hey guys, welcome to today's video where we'll be previewing the Pitt Panthers. Last year I had them at 9-3 with a 6-2 conference record. That was the prediction, and they actually went 3-9 with a 2-6 conference record. So really completely the opposite of what I was predicting. And they and Louisville were the teams that I was really wrong on. And I was pretty shocked at how poorly Pitt performed last year. I mean, it was a pretty bad season. The only silver lining really was that win over Louisville, who was ultimately the runner-up in the conference. Key departures from last year's team: defensive lineman DeAndre Jules, Samuel Akunlola, as well as tackle Matt Goncalves, wide receiver Bub Means, defensive back MJ Devonshire, safety Buddy Mack, and cornerback Javonte Royal. And really, the biggest loss, I think, is defensive line coach Charlie Partridge. He was a big part of what made Pitt's defense so good and so unique to the ACC was their game plan week in and week out of blitzes and getting pressure on the quarterback. And it really made them a very dangerous team defensively, and now he's gone. Key rivals, though: quarterback Eli Holstein from Alabama, wide receiver Raphael Williams Jr., linebacker Key Thompson, running back Desmond Reed, edge David Oljegby, tight end Jake Overman, and defensive lineman Dayon Hayes. The defense from last year was one of the worst in the conference, and with the transfers, it's still going to be a rough year this year for Pitt. And as I mentioned earlier, with Charlie Partridge departing, I think the defense is actually going to be taking an even further step back. I was considering discussing whether Narduzzi gets fired this year, but then I took a look at his contract. He's extended until 2030 after that ACC championship season in 2021, and his salary is around $5.6 million, I believe. So it would be pretty costly to fire him. You know, his buyout is somewhere around 28 to 29 million, and I don't think Pitt is looking to have that kind of buyout and still continue to try and compete for the ACC and on the national stage. So I don't think he'll be getting fired even if they have a bad year. Strengths, though, for this team: offensive line. You returned 4 starters from last year's team, so I do expect the offensive line to be pretty good. And running back Rodney Hammond Jr. He didn't have a huge season last year, but he had some decent moments. And obviously, there's quarterback controversy this year between Eli Holstein and Nate Yarnell. Nate Yarnell played a few games last year, and I believe he went 1-1 in his starts. And Eli Holstein apparently has been impressing the staff this offseason. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up being the starter from what we're hearing from the staff and obviously what we saw in the spring game. So it'll be interesting to see. Weaknesses: I think your entire defense is a weakness. I just don't think Pitt is going to have that same level of defense that they had from 21 to 22. You know, 22, they were still a pretty good team even after Kenny Pickett left and was replaced by Caden Slovis. And they almost upset Tennessee. And really that defense was what was making Pitt a contender on the national stage, and a big part of that was their defensive line and how they were able to get pressure on the quarterback, and now that game plan is gone. Well, let's get into the schedule. You start off week 1 against Kent State. I don't think they're that good a group of 5 team, and you have a much higher talent level than they do. I think you get the win. Then you go on the road at Cincinnati, a Big 12 team led by Scott Satterfield. I think because you're on the road and they've got a little bit more expectations than you take a loss. Then you have the backyard brawl against West Virginia, West Virginia kind of surprised some people last year with the amount of games that they won, with Neil Brown not being that well thought of as a head coach, but he really surprised some people. And one of the early signs of that West Virginia team starting to really put themselves together was the backyard brawl last year when they beat you. And that sort of spelled troubling signs for Pitt early on last year when they lost. And I think it's a repeat this year. I think West Virginia beats you again in the backyard brawl. You move on to take on Youngstown State. Obviously, shouldn't be much trouble for you with your talent level. I think you'll get an easy win there. Then you have your bye week and you go on the road to face UNC. UNC obviously doesn't have Drake May anymore, and they still have their problems on defense that they usually do. They still have Amarion Hampton, and Max Johnson will still be a decent quarterback for them. You're on the road. I think UNC hands you a loss. You come back to play Cal in their first season in the ACC. They have a little bit of talent on the squad, but I think you'll have enough with being at home and your game plan to get the win against the Golden Bears. Then you have your bye week, and you take on Syracuse. Syracuse has a first-year head coach in Fran Brown, and they have Kyle McCord and Aronde Gadsden there. They're going to be a very interesting team to watch and see how that will work out for them. And moving on into year 2 for Fran Brown and year 3, and if they can be a contender, which I believe Fran Brown can get them to that level. And part of that will be winning games like this. And I think Syracuse hands you a loss. You then go on the road to SMU. With all the returning production that they have on offense, it's a road game. It's really far to go to Dallas from Pittsburgh. I'll have you down for a loss. You then take on Virginia. Virginia is still in their building process with Tony Elliott. They have some talent, but I don't think it's an overwhelming margin between you and Virginia. And since you're at home, I'll give you the win. You then take on Clemson at home, although I don't think Clemson is going to end up playing in the championship game because they're going to have another down year by their standards. I still think they're much, much better than you, and they'll hand you another loss. Then you go at Louisville. Louisville is a contender for the championship game. They're a really good squad with what Brom has already established there. Really good coaching. Their defense is going to be very capable, and they hand you a loss. And then you go on the road at Boston College, another team with a first-year head coach in Bill O'Brien. And I'm excited to see what he does with Thomas Castellanos there. And they're another program that I think is going to be a contender if they can develop under O'Brien. And I think they hand you another loss. That brings your record to 4-8 with a 2-6 conference record. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.